Great stuff. So, yeah, welcome to another Coach's Corner. I'm with my good friend, I'm going to say, Dr. Ed Coughlan, purveyor of all things skill acquisition and coaching. So welcome, Ed. Nice to have you join us. Thanks for your time.
Not at all, Will. Absolutely, good friend. Thank you very much for the invite. And we've been talking about this for a while, so it's good to get on a call finally.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just really want to get into. Sorry, just trying to find my screen then. Make sure I could see everything that was going on. I just really want to get into your understanding of coaching, how that's evolved, like your journey a little bit. So really interested in that, and obviously you're unique in the fact that you're trying to understand a lot of this work academically, but also practically coaching, supporting other coaches. So real vast range of experiences that might help others to navigate some of these ideas. So thanks for your time. And we were talking off air about lots of things, all things talent and skill and coaching. So it'd be great to kind of have that conversation. I wonder if we start with you, mate, and just a little bit about, your background and how you have kind of migrated to where you are now.
Yeah. So I suppose started coaching 30 years ago, which is a bit strange to think. Last year, in fact, was my 30th year coaching. And I think I came into coaching, I'm not too sure how. The person in my school, I just finished school, and the person who was in the school asked me would I come back and take a team and just help, but not a field sport team, like a squad. It was table tennis, actually. Would I help out with the table tennis team, with the school team? And I was like, okay. And that was the start, to be honest. I had been playing different sports myself, but for whatever reason, this teacher had asked me would I come back and help out. And for the first, if I'm coaching 30 years, if I put a really crude division on it, I would say it was probably, it's not exactly like this, but I'd say that the first 10 years were very different to the second 10 years, which are very different to the last 10 years. And in what way? And it's not as crude as that exact decade, but certainly the first 8 years of my coaching life, I coached the way I was coached.
Yeah.
And how was I coached? I was coached by generally men a lot older than me who were coaching the way they were coached. So if I'm coaching that way, because that's how they coached me, it's likely the coaching I was doing was from 30, 40, 50 years earlier, which would have been quite a militaristic style, which is where a lot of coaching came from, which I've now since found out from kind of looking at the history of coaching and stuff. And then I began to just question things, because apparently I'm quite an inquisitive person, I'm being told. But so I began to question things, and I began to realize that there was a lot of things that I was doing in my coaching sessions that were not happening then when I would go into match situations or competitions. And the next kind of period of my coaching, I went heavily down to the physical development. I did a load of work in strength and conditioning. I did a lot of work in that area, and was very fortunate. I got to work with elite level athletes kind of around the Olympic Games space, and below that into worlds and Europeans and national stuff. So really exposed myself to, again, very fortunately, a lot of high performing, high achieving individuals. And it was somewhat comfortable for that period of time, because strength and conditioning is somewhat removed from the performance space. You're asking people to maybe engage with certain lifts and things, but your job is very much, you need to get them strong, robust, powerful, explosive, and we'll take care of the stuff when they hit the pitch or the court or the pool or whatever it might have been. And I was very fortunate that I was working in that strength conditioning space across a few different sports. So again, it probably touched back into my control freak side to me, because there is a big part of that to me that I have to engage with quite a lot still nowadays. I have to remind myself that my job isn't to control the people I work with. But in the early days of my work, it was very much, I've written it out on a piece of paper and it's going to go to plan. And like God, it's going to go to plan, And I even, I remember the first time I engaged with a coach mentor, one of the comments that was made to me was, he asked me the color of one of the players' trainers in the gym. And I was like, I don't know, what does that matter? He said, well, I'm not surprised you don't know, because you spend so much time referring to your plan. It was just always looking down. Are we on time? Is it going to plan? Is it, you know what I mean? And not having my head up and actually watching what's happening in front of me.
What a great question.
So yeah, exactly. So over that period of time, I began to stay very strongly, because that was my job in the strength and conditioning space, the physical development and the, engaging with the medics around what the physio was looking for rehabilitation of injuries and things like that, let's say. But I then began to peer out over the wall and be thinking, what are these players and athletes doing when they go out of the gym from me? And again, what did I find? Wow, they're doing a lot of stuff that doesn't happen on the court, on the course, on the pitch, in the pool. You know what I mean? And it just brought me back into being more hands-on in a coaching role, as opposed to not even in the room of the coaches, because we were in the gym and the coaches rarely came into the gym, and it was that type of an environment back then. And I know, don't get me wrong, strength and conditioning has moved on massively in a lot of areas since then as well. So then, as I said, that second decade was kind of wrapping up with me being very now heavily back into coaching athletes directly in their sport, not as an adjunct to their sport. I'm the guy who they go to for physical stuff, and then they go and do their sport. And that was probably around the time, the early noughties, when I had the good fortune to run into Rick Shuttleworth. And the rest, as they say, is history, because he just challenged everything I was doing. And I mean everything that I was doing. He was in Ireland at the time. I was doing a degree. I went back as a mature student, because again, I found myself in the early noughties thinking there's got to be a better way. And I went back to university to engage with this other way, let's say. So I was going in with my eyes wide open, a mature student, you know what I mean? So I was going in with already a bag full of questions that I need answering, So
that first bit that you're coaching, like, you in a professional coaching space then, rather than university, and it kind of like you're hopping across to do university whilst you carry on coaching.
Yes.
What was that like? So we'll come back to the Rick bit in a minute, if that's okay, because I think that'll be hugely rich. But what's that like? You go in with that bag of questions.
Yeah, that was very interesting, because very quickly, when I went to the university, I was very quickly. I got a job within the university to actually work within the athlete academy. So any of the essentially Olympic bound scholars, I became the lead S&C for them within the university. So all of a sudden I became heavily involved within the university environment, let's say, track and field athletes and a couple of others. So I was now a student, and I was doing my job, and then I was also now working within the university in that environment. And there was a brilliant manager of that gym facility, my boss at the time. Brilliant, absolutely. One of these guys was like, Ed, you tell me, like my job is to give you what you need so you can fly, And I was like, wow, where have you been all my life, type of thing. Even within this gym environment, let's say. Brilliant supportive guy.
Yeah.
So that was very interesting, because all of a sudden now I had a faculty of staff that were going to be at the end of all my questions. And one of the first things I realized, again, from engaging with one of them, a brilliant guy there, Giles Warrington, and he himself, and that was one thing I was very fortunate. Of that faculty, a lot of them were applied practitioners themselves. It was huge. And what I found was the applied practitioners in the faculty that I was now a mature student, had very few answers for me, but had brilliant questions. They were very slow to give me an easy out, They would answer my questions with, well, go away and read this. Well, this is what it was for me, but that's not to say that's what it would be for you, There was really, and I remember thinking, these guys don't seem to know that much. All they ever answer my questions with are with more questions, and go away and read this or look at that. But of course, in time, I began to realize they were making sure that they didn't impose their philosophy on me. They wanted me to develop my own philosophy based on what the evidence was, and not trying to pollute it with their opinion.
Yeah.
But at the time I was thinking, do any of these guys know anything? Because no one seems to have an answer for me.
Well,
And then, yeah.
I was going to say, and that comes across in our interactions. Like, I enjoy our discussions because there's a sense that you keep me quite grounded. I think whenever we're having these chats, like, what's the evidence pointing to? We can't just have this like one clear opinion. We need to go and seek out the evidence to support it. So it sounds like a lot of that comes from your kind of underpinning.
That interaction.
Yeah.
Oh, but it did, because then what I began to realize, there was other faculty, and again, all strong, but some of the faculty were academic only.
Yeah. And
they were far more quick to give me answers, because maybe they didn't have that experience with boots on the ground to realize there is no one answer that can answer. There is no one answer that can answer the question for an entire squad.
Yeah.
There is no one system that fixes it all, let's say.
Yeah.
So I found, probably by about the end of second year of that time, very busy now, because I think around that time there was in a games coming up and so on and so forth. There was a lot of things, moving parts for me. I was, living with my future wife, and it was all, I'm now back a student. She's like, what's going on here? I wasn't going out with a student like a couple of years ago. Now I'm going out with a student, so that was all. There was a lot happening.
Yeah.
But in the middle of all of that, by about second year, I began to really realize that I've got to ask better questions.
Yeah.
I kept looking. I was only asking questions to get a quick answer. And I think that's never a good place to be in, because that was still speaking to the organized Ed, that was the Ed who likes everything in a place, and it's really structured, and it's really, but I was only asking the question because I was like, oh, no, it's just a quick question. And if you can give me that, I won't bother you anymore, because you know what? I don't want you to really engage me, because I think I've got it all.
Yeah.
Whereas some of these guys like Donal O'Gorman, Aidan Moran, Giles Warrington, as I mentioned, Niall Moyna, these are the faculty at the time.
Yeah, wow.
Catherine Woods, who's gone on to do some incredible stuff around the physical activity space in Ireland. These were the people. They weren't giving me the answers. They were forcing me to go and look deeper, forcing me to come back with better questions. And that's something that at the time I was probably frustrated with, but it has had a massive impact on the last 15 years of my life, 20 years.
And I guess, well, I'll ask rather than put words in your mouth, but impact on both research and coaching practice, right? That ability to seek out better questions.
Well, you look at the research team that I lead here at MTU, they're all coaches. Yeah. And they're all very sharp, very bright people. As I think I said to you before we came on, I recruit heavily from our undergraduate program, and they're all top in the class students. Yeah. All the men and women who are who do research with me and my colleagues that have come through our course, they're all the leading students. So, so it's not just the brains we're looking for, because research is challenging, but they're all applied practitioners too.
Yeah, trying to make sense of stuff they've seen.
Exactly. So the questions they're asking are not questions that they think is a good question to ask just because, I've come up with something. It's because this is challenging me at work. Yeah. That's why I want to ask this question. So so the work we're doing in skill acquisition now and coaching science is all being fed by what's actually happening on the ground with coaches and athletes. And it's been researched by very strong academic students who are now postgrads, but who are all practitioners themselves. Yeah. And that has an impact on how we recruit,
Should we dive into a bit of that research stuff now, or do you want to the kind of coaching journey, finish that first, and like what does controlled Ed want to do?
Yeah, the coaching journey, the coaching journey probably has impacted the research. So even to finish that side off on the coaching journey, because that's obviously ever evolving, is as I started engaging with Rick, I began to realize my job as a coach was not to control what was happening in the environment. My job as a coach was just to create the environment and see how they engage with it. And that's what's had a huge impact now. And some of the main projects we do here are things like the IRFU project and that recent publication where Matt Wilkie and Nick Winkelman leading the way as far as developing a coach education framework that actually is about how to coach, not what coaching is.
Yeah.
That's exactly my experience.
Yeah.
You could have asked me 30 years ago what coaching is, and I could have answered you, but I couldn't have told you how to coach though.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have, it wasn't coaching what I was doing. It was just organizing. I was just herding cattle, essentially.
Well, let's go into that then. So that's a really cool coaching journey, and I'd like to come back to it and ask you about coaching now for you, but we'll dive across into research. And so what's the sort of body of work that you're doing now, grounded in? What kind of things are you asking and trying to answer?
It's heavily grounded in constraints-led approach to coaching. It's heavily grounded then in the offshoots of that. There's subtle differences and some big differences, but things around game-based coaching, you know what I mean? And how that differs and the like, let's say. Because again, I think for people who are coming from a place where they're more drills oriented, constraints-led approach could be quite a leap for them. So there are certain bridges that we are seeing that coaches are engaging with on their way. And I think part of our job as academics and practitioners and mentors and coaches is to continue to create bridges to help them move away from more didactic drills-oriented stuff towards the more game stuff, towards the more constrained stuff, let's say. You know, I think what I've seen over the years, if we try and make them jump from one straight to the end point, the bridge is too long, and a bridge that's so long isn't very stable, let's say, you know. So we're making those little things, putting those kind of bridges along the way. The concern that sometimes happens is when they move from maybe what they've known before, which is where I would have been at, all very organized, controlled, structured, huge expectation. Well, this is what must happen in this drill.
Yeah. That's
why I'm setting it up. And if it's not happening, the drill, you're failing the drill. And it's not because the drill is crap drill, let's say, you know. What can happen is when they move away from that and find, oh, so I can do things through games and that games-based approach, sometimes we've seen that it's hard for them to move off that then because they think, oh, that's the end. And we're like, no, hang on. There was only a bridge to get you to even more interesting stuff around how you can manipulate the constraints for even more to be exposed to the players, which then starts getting them to be aware of affordances and things like that and what their action capability is, let's say. So it's a tricky one. Yes, we want to move them away from the stuff where most of the coaching that I would have done myself in the early days and what most coaches I still see being done. We move them away from that and they think, oh, that's it. I'm now, and you're like, no, it's a journey. We're moving towards an ever more ecological, a more engaging, interactive type of a coaching athlete interaction, essentially, you know. So that's fun. So let's say if I'm going to speak to some of the research specifically, Nick Winkelman and Matt Wilkie, before he moved back to Australia, developed a model, right? And that model is what is behind that more recent publication. And what that model was, and it's incredibly ambitious, was to try and put a few different theories of coaching into one theory, and to have it that when you go into a coach education setting, you're going to coach, and that at all times of a coach education process, you're coaching. You're not ever being sitting in a room and being told what to do, when to do it, and how to do it, and all that kind of stuff, and never get an opportunity at some stage of that phase of your coach education where you're not coaching. So, and then on top of that, when you are actually on the ground and doing some coaching, you're the one coaching. You're not standing on the side of the pitch watching someone else telling you what to do, you know, because again, there's then that distance. We want more people to coach in the way they do and have them being brought on a journey while they're coaching, as opposed to watch me, I'm the expert coach, now you do that. it's just a very unfair thing to do. It's an unfair transaction to ask someone, most of whom are volunteer coaches, are helping out only because their kids are involved themselves, let's say.
Yeah.
So the three pillars upon which the lads at the RFU put together was one around self-determination theory. So that was a pillar. Another pillar is around explicit learning theories. Okay, so about, you know, cues and how what we talk to people and what's the language of coaching, which speaks very strongly to the work of Nick Winkelman's book, The Language of Coaching. And then the last part is that implicit learning theories. Okay, how do we actually get them to learn without them feeling like I'm learning right now because I'm just engaging in a task?
Yeah.
Now, outside of all of that, there's a nice little piece around reflective practice, which again was something that came to my journey probably in that first decade, and I resisted it for a long time. It was really only in the second decade when I began to realize the power of reflective practice and the absolute unbelievable insights I can get from my own practice by just going back and looking at what I've just done. Being my own critic, let's say, you know, and look, you know, the work of Brendan Cropley and all his colleagues has been hugely informative of people on how to engage with reflective practice properly. So basically, that was the model they put together, and then our job here was to put that model into action and to evaluate its effectiveness compared to, let's say, what previous models of coaching would look like. And that's kind of the beginning of, as you see, from that kind of review paper where we were just trying to determine where does it sit. Now, there's 3 studies that we have. There's one that's already been submitted, it's under review, but that's the joy of this work. We've incredibly privileged position to evaluate a novel coach education framework to try and see if we can move the dial away from the what coaching approach and towards the more of the how coaching approach.
Yeah, I find that really interesting. Was there a sense that people were being exposed to just sort of sit there in a room type experiences? You know, like it almost fascinates me that can be a thing. But I notice in England at the moment that some courses are now going online. You know, you've got a coaching course that might just be online, and that sort of baffles me as to how you'll get to the point where you can actually coach or experience your coaching. So yeah, I don't know. What's your reflections on the context in Ireland?
You and me both, Will. I'm seriously worried for coach education when I see an email coming through from our club or whatever saying, okay, guys, so level 1 now, we can do it online. And I'm like, and it's only over, you know, Friday night, 4 hours Saturday, 2 hours Sunday, and it's all online because it's really convenient. So, and it'll be recorded. So if you can't make it, you can go back, and you're like, oh my word, now we don't even have to interact.
Yeah.
And if you can show that you did it, you'll get your certificate. And now another metric has been ticked by some NGB somewhere that X number of people have now been through our foundation level and our level 1. But there's been no checking for learning. There's been no checking for understanding. It's like all the lectures that, again, from my time with you guys in Gloucestershire and our time here in MTU, you wrap up a lecture, say, okay, guys, what do we do today? Yeah. And what do you think we might do next day? Where will that lead? And what were the parts today that was kind of tricky? Okay, we might come back to that next day. That's not even necessary. It's not happening. There's no evaluation of, does this work? Did I reach you today?
Yeah.
Because you know what? I'm doing these courses because the club wants people to go through. So I'm doing it for twofold. I'm like, okay, I'll do it. But I'm also really curious, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, there was no feedback form to fill in afterwards. It was all online. There was Q&A twice, but it was led by one person. And they were kind of asking questions and it's a scary place to be in.
It's tricky with coaching. I think I've just experienced a bit of online teaching. Obviously, most of us have with the pandemic, but equally, I have just recently, and you don't get that ability to struggle together or to feel uncomfortable together. And I think that's something that it's got to be really relevant to coaching, isn't it? I think we've got to be in that space where we can work through problems together.
Yeah. Well, I give you a classic case. I might have a lecture where I have 30 slides in a lecture. I can guarantee you I'll get through those 30 slides if I'm online in a Zoom call with the class, because there is Any questions, guys? And I'm looking at all these 30 black boxes in front of me with white names because they don't have to turn on the cameras. I could do that same class the next day and cancel the Zoom. I might get through 3 slides.
Yeah.
Because we'll get stuck on something, and it's okay to get stuck on something. And the way I now lecture, I'm not going to make it easy for you if it's something that I think you really need to engage with. I mean, okay, well, what do you think that is? And well, where do you think that came from? Okay, well, we're going to take 4 minutes, put in a couple of keywords online, and let's see what comes back. Put away the phones. What did you come up with? What's out there? Any papers come up? I want to, as you said, I want to get into the weeds with this.
Yeah. So we talked offline about protecting the term coach, but also we're getting into here sort of some of the theoretical underpinnings. You know, one of my pre-designed questions is around like how important for you is a theoretical understanding in coaching. It's something that's hotly debated, I think. You know, how informed do you have to be? So I wonder if we pick up a bit of that. It's a messy question there, but
no, if I may, I'd like to go with the protection of the coach term first, because it's a very current passion of mine right now. Again, a bit of background for people. Yes, I work professionally as a coach, but I'm a dad of 2 boys, so I coach with them. So I'm a volunteer coach there. I'm just back with the other parents. And we're in a very unfortunate situation in Ireland where we have all, like in the two environments, the 2 sports that I'm involved with across the different teams, we've no mums helping out with. So even that's something we've got, like, what's going on? Why? What are we doing that is not encouraging even one? We've 60 boys in the under 11s. That's 120 parents. We've 16 dads coaching. Out of 120 parents, there's only like that, and that's just in one of the sports, in one team environment, you know. But on that, and that's a separate thing altogether again. But on that, I'm a volunteer coach dad. Yes, is it my full-time job in coaching and coach education and all this? Yeah, it is. But in that environment, there's a person who's in charge and runs all the stuff, and I just come along with my kid and I help out and I coach with the other dads. But as I'm beginning to see, the term coach is being bandied about too freely, and I think it puts an unnecessary pressure on these volunteer parents. And I've been having these conversations with national governing bodies over recent months. I want us to see, can we protect the term coach a little bit more, to take some of this pressure off these parents who are doing a huge job for grassroots sport. Without volunteerism, there is no grassroots sport. But we too quickly, oh, this is my daughter Mary, and she's coming along and she wants to play basketball. Oh, great! Will you help out? Well, sure, you're here, and you okay, sure, I'll help out. Here's a top with coach on the back and your initials on the front. It's not fair on that parent. It's fundamentally not fair, as opposed to here's the top, but maybe there's nothing on the back, you know?
Yeah.
And you can call yourself whatever you want. I'm the assistant, parent helper, assistant, volunteer. But I think the word coach, for me, I think it deserves more gravitas, more respect, because currently the way it's interpreted by parents is that it's a heavy fleece to wear. It's a heavy tracksuit to put on, because all of a sudden I'm being asked questions because of what's written on the back of the tracksuit. And I think that's something we've just got to be better at, encouraging more people to come in and not feeling like, gee, but I'm not a coach. That's okay. You're right. You're not a coach. You're the mom and dad, and you work in whatever job you are, and you might be an accountant. You're an accountant, but you're not a coach.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. But you are helping, and it's really important.
You're helping. You're important. Without you, we have no sport.
Yeah.
But to give this person, lesson plans, and this is what we're doing tonight, and they're working full-time jobs, and they get to it on the way, and they're getting, what are we doing? We're setting this up. Gee, what? It's just it's unfair.
Yeah, tricky.
It's unfair. I
was going to say, what has to happen in your context? What has to happen to get us to So like we have the debates here. It's long
Yeah.
been the sort of start of a lecture series where we go, do you know what, coaches, there's not enough money to fund the number of coaches that we need to run grassroots sport right through. So you end up with volunteers. Do we need, one coach per club that's funded by someone? Like, what has to happen in your
Well,
context for there
currently,
to be enough trained coaches?
yeah, well, currently I would understand, I'd have an appreciation that there's a lot of budget goes in clubs at the moment to pay for coach education of the parents. Okay. So these volunteer coaches go and do your foundation level, then go and do your level 1 and go and do your level 1A, B, you know what I mean? Because there's so many layers now, so many. Like when I started out, it was 4 levels. That was it. You just go through your badges, 4 badges in over a number of years, whatever. Now, let's say in soccer in the FAI here, it's the PDP1, PDP2, PDP3. That's still before you even get to, you know what I mean? But so they're funding all of these, right? And you could have 60 coaches from a club going to one of these, but no one ever checks for understanding. You go to training session the very next week. Has the training changed? Nope. Why? Because they didn't coach during it. So there is money being spent on coach education, but no one's checking whether it's actually having any change in behavior. So put that money into something where, yes, you've got an employed coaching officer, and their responsibility is, and this is where the constraints approach is such a help for coaches. What we're doing today, we're going to create a task, and I just want you to coach the task. Let the players engage with the task.
Yeah.
You don't have to, you're coaching to the task, you're coaching to the environment, you're coaching to you know what I mean? It takes a huge amount of pressure off. And anytime I've done that work with coaches, they're like, oh my God, I feel I can breathe here, because normally I'm watching the 16 kids and I'm trying to joystick coach all 16 kids and tell them what to do, when to do it, how to do it. Whereas you're just telling me, hang on, there's a rule here that you want to make sure stays consistent throughout this game. Let them figure out what happens, but just make sure you coach the rule. Stay strong on the rule or whatever, or the constraint or the dimension or the, you know what I mean? And it's a huge relief for coaches. But I don't know of any national governing body that is actually having that as their introduction to coach education. It's all, so there are 5 different coaching styles. Are you the the dictator or the pacifier or and you're like, oh my word, that's still going on?
Yeah.
And it is still going on. I was at a coach education thing last year, 2021, and in the coach and I won't mention the sport, but in the sport there's a goalkeeper. Okay, so there's lots of sports that could be. So, and on the slide was, you need to make sure your goalkeeper is brave. That was on a slide from a national governing body about, well, your goalkeeper needs, so identify, so just kind of come up, you need to identify that kid in your team who's brave, because that you need to be brave to be a goalkeeper. And I was like, hang on a second, we're not actually saying this, are we?
Wow.
But as opposed to, so your other positions on the field, they don't need to be brave, but the goalkeeper does need to be brave. It wasn't in any other line on the pitch when they spoke about the other different positions of the pitch. That word never ever came up. But for the goalkeeping slide, brave was on the slide.
Incredible. We've decided what brave is, what kids are brave. We're not going to let them grow into bravery. We're not going to there's all sorts of stuff going on there. That's.
And sure, look, I'm doing it at the moment. The team that I take with the under 15s in soccer, we have a few of our players are still, they're going into a challenge and the ball is kicked. They turn away from the ball quite a bit. Yeah. Okay, still. And I'm like, okay, well, what are we doing? We're making rules within the game that might cause a natural turnover if you turn away from the ball.
Yeah.
It's not that you do it all the time, so we're putting a context. We don't want people to be foolish and put themselves in harm's way. But if there's a time where, like, hang on, you didn't need to turn away from there, natural turnover. Come on, you've got to start appreciating and interacting with what's happening in front of you. And again, what happens? they pre-think, oh, this is going to happen, so I'm going to do this move before anything happens. They're not actually engaging with what's happening in front of them.
Yeah, not reading
And
the
I would say,
cues
hang
and
on, yeah, exactly. They're not looking at the physical cues that might be giving them some information. They're not looking, you know what I mean? Even contextual cues that
yeah,
might give them some information. Let that guide whether or not you're going to do something with your body or not. Let's say,
yeah.
And again, and so from that perspective, going back to the the coach education, the coaching, I think number one, absolutely, we need to be. I think we need to have a conversation about protecting the term coach, because I think it brings with it a lot of responsibility, and then the coach education that backs it up is not good enough, because they go to a coach education seminar and they got 60 slides in 1 hour. And, well, it's heavily, very densely populated with loads of words, and it's, do you know what I mean? And
Yeah,
again, this is the important thing. I don't blame the facilitators in these, because they themselves are doing a job,
yeah.
But at
But if
some
you're,
point in time, we'll have to shout stop.
yeah, if your journey is 30 years of trying to make sense of this stuff, the impact on your coaching practice, that I feel like there's a sense we're trying to capture. It might be your 30 years, might be someone else's 40 years, might be someone else's 15 years, but we're trying to capture all that and stick it in a slide deck and give it to a load of people. That's quite challenging. So the second part of my question, I think you've answered, but I'd like to tease through it, is like, where does theory fit for you? I think you've already said you want to protect the term coach, which sees it as a profession from a knowledge base rather than necessarily always a paid base, I think. Hopefully paid, but so where does theory fit, and how important?
So I think, I think theory is hugely important, because it helps people build a rationale for what's happening in front of them. I'm often asked about, why are we doing this? And a lot of times my response is, guys, stop asking why I'm doing it, because you know what? It's not me. There is evidence to support why I'm doing it. This is not my idea. There's evidence that is guiding why we should do this. And it helps me remove Ed from the conversation, because I'm not everyone's cup of tea, Will. So it can't live or die whether or not someone likes the sound of my voice. It can't, because then you're going to lose people who think he's a dickhead. You know what I mean? I'm just not going to listen to anything he says because I just don't like him. And whatever. It cannot. It always has to be, my job as a coach educator, as a coach, is to have the evidence guide me. So this is not personal, guys. This is not me saying this, me suggesting something to you because it's just, I want to do the opposite to what you're doing. No. If what I'm suggesting is different to what you're doing, it's because what I'm suggesting is coming from an evidence base, a knowledge base, a theoretical base. What's your rationale?
Yeah.
If it's YouTube, that's not good enough. If it's something you've heard, that's not good. Do you know what I mean? And again, and this is the tricky part, because we know from evidence that coaches learn most from coaches, from the informal interactions. So what do academics need to do? They need to do better at disseminating their work into meaningful chunks, so coaches and volunteers and assistants can actually access it and make it easily digestible and translatable into where they are. And that's why I will happily get anybody who's ever got in touch with me a paper. If they say, I can't get access to this, send me your email. I'll send it on to you. I'll send whatever. And I'll do one better. If you do read it, I'd love to get on a call with you.
Yeah.
Whomever, I don't care. I'd love to get on a call.
Chats.
What did you take from it? What did you take from it? Because I don't care how many years experience you have. If this is the first paper you ever read, you're going to take something that I will not have taken from it. I want to have that conversation.
Yeah,
We need
coaching.
more people engaging in that type of those kind of discussions.
So we take the.
So for me, yeah.
No,
So for me, I think the evidence and the theories are important. And look, that's why the stuff that you guys do with the books around the constraints series and all that, and the one that's coming out now with Rob and Randy for baseball, and the ones that have been there for golf for Peter and so on, they're huge. They're hugely important. Why? Because there is a lot of evidence in there, but there's also a lot of reachable, digestible things that coaches can actually come away with, like, I can try that the next night. And if someone asks me, I actually, because of how it's written in the book, I can actually kind of give them, I can describe why I'm doing it. I can give them rationale where it's coming from and where it may lead to, but there's no definites about where it will lead to, because I don't know. That's not my journey. It's going to be the player's journey.
Yeah,
But
for
that's
sure.
why those resources are important.
So a question around like it comes through that theory is important to you, but if I'm a coach and I'm presented with different, often competing ideas, how are we making sense of that? Just in terms of theory, because then I'll get it, because you've got a deep understanding of a breadth of theories, which has been really great for me, and interacting with you has really helped me. But like, how are we making sense when they're competing? And then I'll get on to how is that impacting on you with your coaching?
I think, I limit myself heavily now on social media, heavily, because I have to, right? And that helps. But I engaged with a guy that I have a huge respect for, Stu McMillan. He's in Altus in the States recently, and I mentioned the term skill police to Stu when we were chatting, or where we were just kind of interacting, and it's a concern for me. It's a concern for me because I'd have very strong principles and opinions on things based on what the evidence is telling me, but or let me put it this way: I hope I continue to be less likely to ram it down someone's throat. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
I probably was more zealous in how I did it previously, but every day I go out coaching, I see that there are holes in so many different things that we know about. And it's only by engaging, interacting with those that you can actually find the holes. I go so far into the weeds that I realize, whoa, wow, that's interesting. That didn't hold water the way I thought it would.
Yeah.
But that leads me to something else. So when you talk about competition and things like that, when we're talking about theoretical principles, that's very schoolyardy type of my car is bigger than your car type of job. I don't know, does anyone win in that situation when what actually coaches on the ground and grassroots coaches and interested coaches and ambitious coaches and so on, what they actually want is to feel safe. And they may not get a lot of certainty, which is fine if they feel safe. And that's another classic thing that you'll understand about. That safe, uncertain environment is a very powerful place to be in. But if there's competition and there's nastiness and bullying and so on and so forth, and people taking pops off each other, that's number one, it's not a safe environment for people to truly explore what's happening.
Yeah.
And number two, it's uncertain, but it's now unsafe. But in fact, the only thing that is certain, something's going to kick off here. And then you just have people who like to say things just because they can keep the antagonism going. Very few things grow in a really positive way in that type of an environment. So I'm far more interested, like you'll know from me, I don't think I've ever said no to someone saying, can I get on a call with you? So I've had thousands of calls from people, and again, it may have come from, oh, I'd love to, do you know that guy, Ed? And would you say he'll be jump on a call with me? And so it comes from a lot of times that I'd love to have a chat with you. I have never had a call where I came away thinking I got nothing from that call. It just has never happened. It has fundamentally never happened. And that comes from a place of, again, probably back in my journey of our jobs is not to force something on somebody. If we're truly curious about what someone else can bring into the domain, into the conversation, you're going to take something from that. So it's quite a selfish thing. It might sound like, oh, I'll get on a call with everyone, but it's quite selfish because I know it's going to move the dial for me, that conversation with whomever it is.
I think, mate, I think that answers the question as well, isn't it? Because you'll have, like, I guess my question was, what do you do if the evidence is confusing you? And it sounds like what you do is you start asking some really good questions and you have conversations. And because I think that's the thing that is often as a coach, you're like, well, it says do this, but it also says do that. Like, how do I make sense of that? And I think those conversations can be really helpful to do that.
Back in 2014, I had an unbelievable conversation. I can still remember it, August 2014, with one of my mentors, right? And I'm a huge fan of people engaging with a mentor. And if you're not, anyone listening here, if you're not, get somebody who's going to be that, that critical eye. That's somebody who will respectfully disagree with you and challenge you. Yeah. And August 2014, I was having a chat with one of my mentors, and he turned around and he was like, he said, tell me the last 5 people you spoke to. And I was like, oh yeah, I spoke to this, and we had a great chat. And he was like, uh-huh. Do you know the 5 before that? Oh yeah, this, because I'd have a journal and I'd reflect on chats, and like I'll do after today's conversation. And he was like, ah, very good. Tell me 3 people that just really get stuck under your skin and, bug you, and they're very different. And I was like, oh, that's easy, only 3 here, And he was like, all right, when did you speak to one of them? Silence. And I was like, how do you mean? Well, when's the last time you spoke to someone that disagrees with you? And I was like, oh God, I know what's coming now. And it has transformed my engagement with coaches.
Yeah.
Now, every year, I will make sure I get in touch with 2, 3, maybe 4, 3, generally 3 guys that I know think very differently to me, and conflict and interpret the evidence differently to me, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And well, they're the ones that drive me even further, because I come away and I'm like, well, first of all, he's not the kind of person I thought he was.
Yeah. Always.
Great guy, she's so strong, and whatever, And August 2014 was a turning point like that. That's now 8 years ago, when all I was doing was listening to the same data. And again, I would, every so often I would have kind of got caught back into that over the last 14 years or 8 years, let's say, stuck back into that a little bit. And you're like, hang on a second. I'm only talking to and listening to people who are all saying the same thing. That's not healthy if we're talking about coaching, which is a hugely human-oriented experience.
Yeah.
If I'm talking about architecture, well, then maybe, because the building needs to stay up, and there's only one way you can put. And again, maybe not. Architects might listen into this like, hang on, Ed. Hey, there's loads of ways you can put a foundation. You know what I mean? But I'm just thinking, and an engineer or whatever, I'd be thinking there, or an IT specialist. Well, there's code, Ed. It's code is code. If you leave out that comma, it doesn't work. And I'm like, okay, well, that's in your world. But I'm not in the world of commas and syntax and perfection so the code runs. I'm in the world of, okay, whoa, hang on, what's going on? How do you mean? What's going on with you? There's something not right today. I know, let's just drive on. Let's just get on with it. No, man, we're not getting on with it. This session is not more important than what's going on. Let's take a beat.
Yeah.
Maybe this session doesn't happen an hour from then, but you know what? We've moved the dial because we put that person's situation priority number 1. And I say to my students here, when I learned that lesson of, if it's important to them, it's important, that changed my coaching too.
Yeah.
Because previous to that, it was, no, it's my session. You're here to do Ed's session.
We will do this. Yeah. No, look, it's fascinating that, I think, and it is an interesting way, because it gets you to start to evaluate the evidence. It also gets you to think about coaching in a really different way, and that's quite nice. And like, I guess I'm going to take us back to Rick a little bit, and changing fundamentally how you're kind of doing things. So, academic researcher, doing coaching, coach education, so how is all that now impacting on your coaching? And like, I know you use some stuff around constraints, so I guess I'm interested in, like, where are you now with your coaching, and what does that look like?
Well, let's put it this way. I think, as you know, I do a lot of work in pro golf, okay? And for an environment that golf is, where we're sold the idea, get to the range with a bucket of balls, just bang the balls out there one after another, let's say. I remember when I first started going into that space about 6 years ago, at this stage, 20, maybe, about that, actually. I was thinking, because I was resisted for a while, about 3 years, for the 3 years before I finally started working in golf, I used to do a lot of work with discrete skill specialists, kickers in rugby, soccer, all these, throwers in rugby, shooters in basketball, that kind of stuff. And I had a guy, friend of mine, you should work in golf. You should work. And I was like, and I grew up around golf and all that, but I was all, I don't know, the way I'm working now, I don't think it's a fit for, and then it was, as I said, it kind of organically came about that all of a sudden I was like, all right, let's have a look at it. And all of a sudden it's almost pretty much what I do now, only in my professional coaching capacity. And remarkably, like, they're all very different people. Like, yes, they're people, so they have that in common, and they're golf, and so they have that in common. And yet not much else overlaps with how we're engaging with each other, me with each of the individuals, because they're all in very different places and so on and so forth. But I think there will be probably a few key words that would jump out. And the reason I'm saying this is because I was asked this question not so long ago. And so I went back and started kind of asking some of the players, what words do I use a lot of? And they're like, don't talk to me. There's one word, and one word was explore. Apparently, I use that a huge amount with the golfers, right? Apparently. And another phrase apparently that I use a lot is, I don't know. And I was like, really? And they're like, are you serious, Ed? When I first started working with you, I thought you didn't have a clue, because you said I don't know for pretty much every question I asked. And then you would have, your answer was, sure, let's have a look at, let's try this, and let's explore around this, and let's change the dimensions of what we're trying to do here, and let's change, So I'm doing this in a very different environment to my voluntary dad coaching thing, where we're just about trying to ensure these kids come back.
Yeah.
In the golf space, there's livelihoods at stake. If this stuff doesn't work, people lose their jobs,
Yeah.
Sponsors go away, and they start thinking. And yet, for me, it's really strong. I put a lot of tasks in front of people, and I tell them and it was like, what? And again, they get used to it. But the early question is, what do you think is going to happen here? I don't know. But you've just said something to me there about what you experience on the course. So I've come up with a task that I think in a practice environment is going to really have that come up quite a bit. And I don't know how you're going to behave and respond to it, but that's why we're going to do it, because I want to see how you respond. Now, if it's too difficult, we're going to have to dial it down a bit, and we might make a change to the rule or the context, or if it's too easy, we'll have to dial it up and whatever. But how will we know that? I don't know, from your feedback. But and again, that's the beauty. Like, I've never done this task before. What? It's like, how? It's only based on, you just said something seems to be happening on the course, and you think there's a pattern. So we've just created a task where the constraint is now going to massively make that thing come up quite a bit. So that's how it came about. It's come about because of you. And they're like, okay,
I've got two questions. One is, give us an example. I'd love to hear an example, if you don't mind. And the second is, given that your background has not been in golf, like, what's your golf knowledge like?
Yeah.
And how is that, like, and I mean that from a position, I genuinely don't know. So I don't mean to put you on the spot there, but have you found that?
Yeah, so I go to the example first. So a classic example would be someone who will come about, let's say, their bunker play. Oh, my bunker play is not great, and so on and so forth. And again, don't get me wrong, there's specialists now in golf in these areas. You'll have a putting specialist and a short game specialist, and you know what I mean? Because there seems to be far more skill specialists emerging in different sports. And which is good, but which is good if they're all talking to each other.
Yeah.
That's one thing I have found since I've come into golf. A lot of the coaches who are contributing to a player, there's one player in the middle, it's like a rondo, and the coaches are all on the outside. I'm stunned at how few of these coaches are talking to each other. And it's all, I just got my job to do with this person right here, right now. And I'm like, whoa, but you got to talk to the other coach. And that comes from my strength and conditioning background. If I'm doing something with a player, I'm like, okay, hey, head coach, what's on tomorrow? Well, that's going to impact what I'm going to do today. Physio, what are you doing? You know what I mean? There's not a lot of that happening.
No.
There's not a lot of people who are like, okay, we've all got to talk so we know what we're going to do, so that when the player is doing it, they're not being overloaded by any one of us because we've just got him now for a day, you know, that kind of way, because maybe
Yeah.
something else happened. So
It's
on that bunker play, let's say, I'll have someone go into a bunker, and it won't be go in there now and hit to that pin 10 times because that's not what I would be saying, okay, well, go into a bunker and let's explore. Let's see what it's like from different shots, different angles, different clubs. And they're like, different clubs? Why would I go to a different club? I don't, look, can we just explore? Let's see what happens. And then we put some constraints on it about where, you know, how far it is allowed to go, because that's going to have an impact. If I just send you to get it out of the bunker, that's too broad. It has to bounce here first, or it has to stop by there. I'm putting constraints on, and then what I'll do is I might see him like, wow, have you noticed how you respond differently when I make the target closer to you compared to far away? No. Oh, let's explore about that. Let's now make a series of tasks around close targets and see how your behavior, do you get stiffer when it's a closer target as opposed to loose, you know? How are you physically when you're relaxed in the bunker? Well, I'm relaxed and degrees of freedom are nice and loose and that, great. Well, surely you should be that way for all bunker shots. If you're stiff, then you have more tension. Oh yeah. Well, let's just explore that, you know?
Yeah.
So that would be a way. My knowledge of golf grew up in a golf family at one stage. Like my brother would have been the golfer, but I'm the youngest of 5. So at one stage, all 7 of us were joined the local club golfing.
Wow.
I would never have played to the level that my brother would. He would have been a scratch golfer, but I probably spent years caddying for him.
Yeah.
As his kid brother, you know, 10 years younger, carrying a bag, being around golf. So I've been around golf probably all my life.
Yeah.
But as far as the knowledge of, you know, some of the world-class coaches and all that, no, I don't, you know. But I think that's my that's my in.
Yeah.
I'm not going to talk to these guys in the way that the golf environment for me, as we said this before we started recording, there's a lot of things in the golf culture that are incredibly resilient and are utterly detrimental to performance. And having been away from that sport and been in a lot of other sports, I'm coming in with that freshness of, why do you do this? And be like, wow, so the only reason you're doing that is because everyone else is doing it. Okay, we gotta have a look at that, you know?
Yeah.
So I would probably have enough to be able to have some interesting conversations, but I think if I had none, my philosophy about how to approach coaching would be sufficient, because I'm asking very general questions initially that then become into very narrow, specific questions. And by that stage, they are themselves answering the questions. Like right now, there's a woman I work with, and she, good player, very good player. And she tells me what she's doing of a day now. Whereas previously when we started working, well, I think, you know, whereas now I said, I'm going to do this today, and here's the consequence. This is the task. It's got to be this. And I'm like, lovely.
Yeah.
And is it the same every day? No chance. Is it, you know, it's all about trying to increase the variability, but everything is about trying to ensure that what she does in practice is as representative of what is going to happen in an event. And so for me, that's behavioral, you know. I want you to feel and experience the behaviors you have in competition in the practice environment.
Yeah.
And I'm able to do that through, you know, being somewhat faithful to the constraints-led approach. Are there times I need to pivot to engage somewhat differently with that person because of something that's going on with me, maybe, that I'm like, oh, my head is wherever, you know, but that's the human element. And that's where I think coaches who are trying to come into this sometimes get really caught up and embroiled in the battles that go on every so often, you know?
Yeah.
And if we are truly interested in getting more people involved, let's show them that this environment is a brilliant environment to go into, and that there is disagreement, but it's not disrespectful disagreement.
Yeah, no, that's nice. That's nice. And how have the players responded? How's the journey been for, look, we're going to do things a bit
It's
differently?
well, again, like for me, like it's not for everyone.
Yeah.
Again, why would it be? You know, who might think that everyone should do this? You know what I mean? It's just crazy stuff. But my philosophy, and I need to be strong on my own philosophy, all the while realizing, yeah, but your job as a coach is to be a guide too, and see what might work with that person initially, and so on. But so to answer your question, I think great. Why? Because why? Because I think what I see from the players that engage with the way I coach, based on the evidence that informs how I coach, there's a joy comes back into their game
Yeah, nice.
that I will have spoken in the early stages of us working together that I think has been beaten out of them. Oftentimes just by themselves, because they believe the culture of the game, they believe what they see on the telly. You know, they're unaware of the forces that are pulling them away from why they got into it in the first place. Like the coverage on the TV on golf, let's say, right? PGA Tour or DP World Tour is so stacked towards who's doing well that week. There are weeks, unless you're Rory or, you know what I mean, you're not being viewed if you're not playing well. If you're not in the top 15, you're not being shown. So you can have a bad week and no one will know about it. But now all of a sudden you have a good week next week and only everyone sees you playing well.
Yeah.
So the idea is that these guys play well all the time. They don't.
No.
They fundamentally don't. But what do we see? We see highlight reels and we see Sports Center showing shot of the day and and again, it's the classic one of, there was a story, what is it, Frank Dick, that famous, very good, well-known coach in the UK. He told that story about if kids only watch Match of the Day, they think there's flipping 15 corners in a match. There's corners every flipping, because all they're seeing is the highlights.
Yeah.
They think that no player ever makes a Hames of something unless it's so bad, we're going to show you the Hames, someone making a complete mess of something. So that can completely and utterly skew your understanding that, like say, for example, Liverpool played yesterday. Mo Salah had 2 complete massive fresh airs yesterday. Was that shown a Match of the Day last night? Nope.
Just the good
So
bits.
when a kid has a fresh air, come on, keep your eye on the ball. Hang on a second, like
I know, but like it's massive for youth development, isn't it?
Fresh air, like.
It's massive for youth development. It's a real challenge, I think, that, let alone the pro end of the sport that you're working in. I had a chat with a friend of mine who's coaching the other day. The young man puts his hand up at the corner. I think they're 9 years old to deliver the corner, and he's like, "Have you practiced this?" I've got no idea what he's doing. Like we don't have any signals. But all the players in the middle must be thinking, what's he got his hand up for? But they're just mimicking, aren't they?
But that's it. I saw a clip similar to that where players at the end of a game were talking behind their hands like this, because they see the pros talking behind their hands just in case someone picks up and reads their lips on the media and, oh, he's talking. And yet there's 10, 11, 12-year-olds putting their hands over their mouth and talking behind their hands at the end of a game. And I think that's glorious stuff. That's beautiful stuff. So long as coaches were aware, look at where they're getting their information from. I'm not going to tell a kid he can't do that and try and mimic his star player and his favorite player from Match Attacks and all that. But as coaches, we need to appreciate we only get the highlight reels of these guys.
Yeah.
Like there's no highlight reel on YouTube of Mo Salah's 30 biggest cock-ups. But there's a lot of highlight reels on Mo Salah's top 30 goals.
Yeah.
You know, like the classic one, Ronaldo played Portugal against Spain, and he had that famous free kick to go 3-2 in the European Championships. So was it a couple of years back? And he does this whole pulling up the pants, and he's standing there with his posture and all this, and his deep breaths, and he pings this incredible free kick to score the goal to go to 3-2, and Portugal beat Spain, I think it was, or either to draw or whatever. And it was like, wow, look at this. He had missed 41 in a row before that, or something crazy. That was his 42nd free kick, and the previous 41 he'd missed. But he was still doing, you know, and of course, what did we see ad nauseum in the media for the next 5 days before the next game? Wonder kicking. But no one, it was only if someone picked up. was like, well, yeah, here's all the ones that he missed for the last 11 games or 15 games or what. I don't have the exact numbers, but it was huge number that he'd missed.
Yeah.
And I have no problem with the kids pulling up their trousers and the deep. Go for it. Be all you know. But as coaches, we've got to be better.
Yeah. Let them
So
make mistakes.
Lose it out over the bar. It's like, oh, come on. What are you doing? You know, and you're like, hang on a second, like Ronaldo missed 41 in a row, like, you know. It's so we need to, and again, that stuff you talk about, how do we get that balance between how much they get in coach education? I have a massive mantra that I would be involved with coach education, and it is less is more.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm doing coach education tonight. First of all, I'm going to make sure that the coaches, it's at a time that they normally coach. I'm not bringing them in for an extra session.
Yeah.
These are all parents, and I'm talking grassroots level.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. Second is going to be on the pitch, and we're going to have them coaching, and we're going to use some people each session and work it that way. And third of all, one, maybe two things that we're going to work on.
Yeah.
But ideally, just one.
Yeah. Nice.
If you come away from this session understanding about how to engage in a session with questions only, that's it. And we're going to do this for 8 weeks, lads. Just engage with the kids through questions only. Because you're a doctor and a nurse and a lawyer and a carpenter and a plumber and a teacher and for 40, 50, 60 hours a week. Thank you for helping out. You're a fantastic source of keeping this club alive. But I'm going to respectfully engage you in some things slowly but surely, but not take any more of your time and not label you with something that puts even more pressure on you when you do come for that hour.
Top man. And I think a great way to wrap up. So Ed, thank you so much for your time. It's been brilliant as ever. Great insights and really rich story. Thanks for that very much, mate.
That's a pleasure, Will. Thank you.